Part 1. The axe no one took. He is lying face down in the ice, has been for over 5,000 years, and beside his body is the one object his killer should have taken and didn't. A copper axe. In his world, copper was not a metal you could simply walk into a shop and buy. It came from, or dug out of hillsides hundreds of miles away, smelted at temperatures that took years of inherited skill to control, and shaped by hands that had been taught a technique most people in his community would never learn in their lifetime. To hold that axe was to hold something almost no one around you could make, and almost no one around you could afford. And yet whoever killed him, an arrow to the shoulder, a struggle, a fall, left it lying in the snow beside the body. Which means, for a moment, just before the ice closed over him for 50 centuries, the most valuable object in his world was worth less to another human being than whatever had just happened between them. That detail should stop you, because it tells you something almost no one expects to learn about wealth. That even 5,000 years ago, before coins, before banks, before a single written word for rich existed anywhere on Earth, humans had already built a world where one man could own something extraordinary, and other men could want him dead anyway. Here is what most people assume about the deep past. They assume it was flat, equal, a long, gray stretch of hunting and gathering where everyone owned roughly the same amount of almost nothing, until agriculture appeared, and then cities, and then, finally, inequality. That sequence feels intuitive. It is taught in textbooks. It is the quiet backdrop of almost every documentary about prehistory ever made. It is also increasingly wrong. In the early 1970s, a man operating an excavator outside a Bulgarian city struck something glinting in the dirt. He filled a shoebox with it and took it home, not yet understanding what he had found. What came out of that ground over the following years would force archaeologists to tear up their own timeline of human history. Nearly 300 graves, most of them holding almost nothing, a flint blade, a bead, a small bone bracelet. Ordinary lives, ending in ordinary poverty. But scattered among them, a small handful of graves contained something that should not have existed yet, according to everything researchers thought they understood about this period of human life. Gold, in quantities and in concentration, that revealed something the bones themselves couldn't. One grave in particular held more gold than had been found anywhere else on the planet from that entire era of human history, combined. A golden scepter, heavy gold bracelets stacked along the forearms, ornaments that had no practical use whatsoever, made purely to be looked at, purely to announce something about the man who once wore them. For graves, out of nearly 300, contained roughly 3/4 of all the gold in the entire cemetery. Read that number again, slowly. This was not a wealthy village where prosperity was shared. This was a community where almost everyone had nothing, and a tiny handful of individuals had nearly everything. At a moment in human history, so early that most people assumed the very concept of rich hadn't been invented yet. It had been invented long before money, long before writing, long before anyone could have told you what a rich man even meant in words. So if it didn't come from coins, or banks, or trade routes humming with commerce, where did it come from? Part 2. The thing you cannot eat. Strip away every modern assumption for a moment, and ask the question at its rawest level. In a world with no currency, no markets, no concept of price, what does it actually mean for a human being to be rich? It cannot mean money. Money does not exist yet. It cannot simply mean food, because food rots, and a surplus of meat in a hot climate is worth nothing in a week. Whatever wealth meant in this world, it had to be something that could survive the passage of time without disappearing. Researchers studying small-scale societies today, herders, farmers, hunters living in conditions that echo the deep past, have identified something quietly unsettling about how inequality actually spreads through a human group. It is not random. It tracks, with startling precision, onto what kind of wealth a society depends on. Hunter-gatherer groups, whose wealth is mostly the meat from yesterday's kill, stay remarkably equal, because that kind of wealth cannot be hoarded. It has to be shared, or it spoils. But the moment a society shifts toward wealth that can be stored, inherited, and defended, herds of animals, plots of land, hardened metal tools that outlast their owners, inequality stops being occasional. It becomes structural. It becomes permanent. and it becomes something that doesn't just exist in a single generation. It gets handed down. This is the moment the story stops being about objects and starts being about something far more disturbing: timing. Because the wealth that finally could be stored, herds, grain stockpiles, worked metal, also happened to be wealth that could be stolen, defended, inherited, or denied to others. For the first time in the existence of our species, an advantage gained by one person in one lifetime no longer had to die with them. It could outlive them. It could be passed directly into the hands of a child who had done nothing to earn it, who had simply been born to the right parent, at the right time, into the right family. This is the precise moment inequality stopped being a temporary accident of circumstance and became something closer to an inheritance. A trait passed down not through genes, but through possessions. And once advantage could be inherited instead of earned, something in human society changed permanently, because the gap between the richest and the poorest no longer had to reset itself with every new generation. It could simply grow. Part 3. The price of being trusted from far away. There is something else buried in these ancient graves that deserves more attention than it usually gets. Distance. The copper in that alpine axe didn't come from anywhere nearby. Isotope analysis traced it back across hundreds of miles, to ore deposits in a completely different region, mined and smelted by people the axe's owner most likely never met. The gold buried with the wealthiest dead in that Bulgarian necropolis sat alongside imported shells from the Mediterranean and blades made of volcanic glass that occurs nowhere near where they were found. This is not a small detail. This is the entire hidden engine of how ancient humans got rich. Because in a world without money, without writing, without any formal way to guarantee a deal between strangers, moving valuable material across hundreds of miles of unfamiliar territory required something almost harder to produce than the material itself. It required someone, somewhere along that chain, to be trusted enough by total strangers that the goods would actually arrive. Wealth, in its earliest form, was not simply about owning rare things. It was about being one of the few people capable of reaching across distance and difference, again and again, without the entire fragile chain of trust collapsing somewhere in the middle. The first rich people in human history may not have been the strongest, or even the most skilled. They may simply have been the most connected, the rare individuals sitting at the crossing point of trade routes, controlling access to resources that everyone else needed and almost no one else could reach. And this reveals something deeply uncomfortable about the nature of wealth itself, something true in the Copper Age and arguably still true now. Wealth has never really been about what you personally produce with your own two hands. It has almost always been about what you control the access to. The man with the copper axe likely didn't mine the ore, smelt the metal, or carve the wooden handle himself. The man buried with a scepter of solid gold almost certainly didn't pan that gold from a riverbed with his own fingers. Their wealth came from somewhere else entirely, from sitting at the center of a network other people depended on, and ensuring that the flow of valuable things passed close enough to them that some of it could be redirected into their own hands. Which means the earliest rich humans on Earth weren't simply lucky. They were positioned. And position, unlike luck, can be deliberately built, defended, and passed on. Part 4. The grave with no body in it. Among the richest burials in that Bulgarian necropolis, archaeologists found something that unsettled them more than the gold itself. Several of the wealthiest graves contain no human remains at all. In their place, life-sized clay masks shaped like human faces, gold discs set into the eyes, gold diadems resting where a head should have been. Elaborate, lavish, unmistakably built for someone of enormous importance. But there was no one inside. The leading explanation is almost more haunting than a body would have been. These were likely symbolic burials, cenotaphs, built for powerful individuals who had died far away, perhaps lost at sea or fallen in some distant conflict. Their actual remains never recovered. Yet their community still needed somewhere to put all that gold. Somewhere to anchor their memory, their authority, their status. Even though the man himself was gone, possibly forever, possibly dissolved into a sea or a battlefield none of them would ever see. Sit with that for a moment. Even 5,000 years ago, wealth was already something larger than the person who held it. It was already becoming a symbol that could survive the body that earned it, a story other people agreed to keep telling, long after the man at the center of it had vanished completely. Which raises an unsettling question that quietly threads through every era of human history since. Was the gold ever really about the man at all? Or was it always about what the people left behind needed to believe? Part 5. What the rich actually bought. Here is the detail that should genuinely disturb you. None of this, the copper axe, the gold scepter, the imported shells from a distant sea, could be eaten. None of it could shelter you from a storm. None of it, in any direct physical sense, kept a single person alive for a single additional day. So what, precisely, were ancient humans actually buying with all of it? The honest answer is almost too simple to feel satisfying. They were buying belief. A man who carried a rare copper axe wasn't simply carrying a tool. He was carrying a constant, visible signal to every other human who saw it, that he had access to something most people never would, that he was connected to networks, skills, and resources that placed him above the ordinary risks of his world. The gold in that Bulgarian grave wasn't there to be useful. It was there to be undeniable. Wealth, from its very first appearance in the archaeological record, was never primarily a tool for survival. It was a tool for being believed. And this is where the story of ancient riches quietly turns into something closer to a warning than a history lesson. Because every signal of wealth humans have ever built, copper axes, gold scepters, sprawling estates, glittering accounts on a screen, exist for the same ancient psychological purpose. Not comfort, not survival, belief. A signal to everyone watching that you are someone worth trusting, worth deferring to, worth aligning yourself with. Even if, underneath the signal, nothing about your actual safety has changed at all. The man in the ice did not need that axe to stay warm. He needed it to be seen. And somewhere in that need, ancient, universal, and apparently present in every stratified human society that has ever been excavated, sits an uncomfortable truth that has never really gone away. We did not simply invent wealth to survive the world. We invented it to be believed by the people standing next to us in it. And 5,000 years later, lying in vaults, scrolling across screens, stacked in portfolios no one will ever physically touch, it is still doing exactly the same job it did the day someone first decided a stranger's gold mattered more than a stranger's life.